Well, Magento 1 didn't survive 2020. You shouldn't be overall that surprised though, because it's been a long time in the making. Adobe announced the end of M1 around September 2018. It's almost 2 years ago. Everything is a lifespan, and Magento 1 had a really great start. It was built on a really good stack. I got heavily involved in it and really jump-started my career, but everything kind of has its age, and it started to show its age the last few years. Magento 1 development did start in 2007. That's 13 years ago. The web has changed a lot since 2007. Back then, Magento was popular because it had MVC support. Just think of that. It was built on PHP 5, and active support for that ended over 3 years ago. If you're currently on a Magento 1 store or developing on it, I'd like to talk through some options you have to continue your business and hopefully find out a great option that's good for you. Before I get started, remember to like and subscribe to this video for more content all about Magento. Also, this video is sponsored by M Academy. Be sure to check out the M Academy library for more content about Magento, PHP, JavaScript, and more. So what exactly does the death of Magento 1 mean, and how do you handle this as a merchant? Well, you have a few options. You can stay on Magento 1, you can migrate to Magento 2, or you can migrate to another platform. So I'll touch base on each one of these. So your first option is to stay on Magento 1. So a group of developers with a lot of experience in Magento 1 came together and formed a group called Mage 1. The premise of this group is to provide security patches for long-lived support for Magento, I believe a period of about 5 years. If you're looking for your Magento store to continue getting updates and new features, this is probably not a great option because this group is only supplying security patches. Of course, if you're looking for new features and active development, you probably shouldn't be on Magento 1 in the first place. Mage 1 is also providing an upgrade path to new versions of PHP, so that's a great option because over time, PHP can become stale and get security vulnerabilities in itself as well. The price of Mage 1 is also very affordable, between 29 and 299 euros, depending on the size of the store you have, which in US dollars is pretty much about the same at the time of this video. The team running Mage 1 is based in Germany and really does have a strong support and knowledge of Magento 1. Consists of a couple developers that have been around for many years since the start of Magento 1 itself. There are also some other options to stay on Magento 1, but really none of them are worth mentioning. Mage 1 has the best support out of all of them. They really are the standard for staying on M1 because of their dedicated team, their support of up to 5 years, and their commitment to deliver security patches as soon as they come out. There is really a big question about staying on Magento 1 in regards to PCI compliance and if it can actually still remain compliant. This is really the biggest risk of staying on M1. Visa actually put out a note to all merchants on Magento telling them really not to use it anymore. Visa is really the standard for accepting credit cards online, so you really need to hear what they have to say. This document basically is the end-all be-all around anything involving PCI compliance and Magento, so you really do have to heed it. In that notice, they mentioned the consequences of not migrating off of Magento 1 on page 3, so let's take a look at that. Since official support for Magento 1 is ending after June 2020, running the web and software applications after this cutoff date creates a number of risks, such as without any upgrade or security patches, merchants' e-commerce sites may degrade and become unstable. Extensions or plugins functionality may break or become unavailable. Over time, Magento developers will only be familiar with Magento 2. Merchants will fall out of PCI compliance with PCI DSS, and e-commerce sites will be more exposed to security risks and increased likelihood of an account data compromise due to the lack of security upgrades. Most of these bullet points are just warnings, but you really got to pay attention to the line around PCI compliance. So let's talk a second about PCI compliance. So PCI compliance is a established set of guidelines help to protect cardholder data. It's mainly to ensure your network and app are secure and that processes are in place to prevent security vulnerabilities from happening on your website. No company or piece of software is exempt from PCI compliance. It applies to everybody, and it's something that nobody can get around. It's sort of like paying your taxes. You can choose not to do it, but if you get caught, there's some pretty hefty consequences. You can get hit with penalties of up to $100,000 a month, If a data breach ever happens, you can get fined $150 for each occurrence. There could be legal consequences. You could definitely get sued or have legal action taken against your business entity. This can also really damage your reputation and lead to lost sales for your company. Look at the Target breach from a few years back. They lost over $440 million in the following quarter, so that's really not something to take lightly. In my opinion, it's just not worth to fight PCI compliance. It's not an option. You just have to abide by it. Let's move on to page 4 of this Visa doc and continue reading what they say about Magento specifically. PCI DSS requirements 6.1 and 6.2 address the need to keep systems up to date with vendor-supplied security patches to protect systems from known vulnerabilities. Hence, failing to migrate a Magento 1 e-commerce website will cause merchants to fall out of PCI DSS compliance because no security patch will be available for new vulnerabilities after June 2020. Specifically, a merchant is required to have policies and procedures and be able to demonstrate that its implementation satisfies requirement 6, develop and maintain secure systems and applications. So I'm not an expert in PCI compliance, but I do know quite a lot of it from my days of working on POS systems. Most e-commerce stores on Magento are small and medium-sized businesses, and they primarily fall into a category of filling out a self-assessment questionnaire, an SAQ. Filling out this questionnaire is really a self-guided process, and once you check all the boxes, you can be pretty sure that you're PCI compliant. Let's pull up the SAQ version A, which relates to card not present transactions. This pretty much applies to any e-commerce site that takes a credit card over the internet. It also only applies for cardholder data that is fully outsourced, which means it doesn't touch your server. So you need to be sure that you're using something like Stripe or Adyen that circumvents the entire Magento system. Otherwise, this SAQ doesn't apply to you, and it's a lot trickier to pass. Let's go to page 5 of this doc, maintaining a vulnerability management program. These are basically the 2 data points from the Visa doc, but let's read them through to make sure we can also pass these. 6.2a are all system components and software protected from known vulnerabilities by installing applicable vendor-supplied security patches. And B, are critical security patches installed within 1 month of release. So it seems now that Magento 1 is dead. It would fail to comply with both of these bullet points. So if you just choose to stay on Magento 1 and do nothing else, you should really adhere to Visa's warning, because you will absolutely fall out of PCI compliance and be liable for all the legalities that come with it. But there is a catch. Visa's notice is under the assumption that Magento is no longer supplying patches, which is definitely the case. However, if you subscribe to Mage 1, they will essentially be treated as the vendor moving forward. Reading through 6.2a and b again, we can be pretty confident if we treat Mage 1 as the vendor, both of these bullet points will actually be able to be passed. Taking another look at the Visa doc again, under 6.1, which wasn't covered in the SAQ, you'll need to establish a process to identify security vulnerabilities using reputable outside sources for security vulnerability info, and assign a risk ranking, for example, high, medium, or low, to newly discovered security vulnerabilities. And reading the line after it, further, these merchants may also fail to obtain a passing approved scanning vendor ASV scan if they are unable to address the vulnerabilities detected in their Magento 1 sites. I would read this as we can probably trust Mage 1 for security patches, but you also need to be able to pass an ASV scan on your website to ensure PCI compliance. So to sum all of this up, essentially if you subscribe to Mage 1, you have a process in place for managing and applying security patches, and you can pass an ASV scan, you should be PCI compliant. To avoid legalities, I'm not a PCI compliant lawyer or certification expert, so definitely do your own research here. So I went through all of this, but I failed to mention this really only applies to Community Edition. What if you're an Enterprise Edition? Mage 1 put out a pretty nice article about Enterprise Edition on their website. Link is below in the description. But to sum things up, Mage 1 doesn't supply EE support. Even though the Enterprise Edition code is commercial and is private, it's still out there in the world waiting to get hacked, so I wouldn't trust that at all. So even if you stay on EE and Magento is no longer supplying updates for it, you still need to pay your license fee. Basically, you need to downgrade your Enterprise Edition down to Community Edition and look for third-party modules to replicate your EE functionality that you need in your store. If you don't, you'll almost assuredly not be PCI compliant. So that's really all there is I need to say about staying on Magento 1. So what are some other options? The most common path for someone on Magento 1 to take, and probably is recommended, is to migrate to Magento 2. I mean, re-platform to Magento 2. It's not a migration. The re-platform itself definitely provides some interesting issues, but it allows you to stay within the Magento ecosystem. A site rebuild also allows you to review all of the decisions you've made in your initial Magento store and fix any poorly designed or architected modules or code within your site, so it gives you kind of another chance to do things over. Most modules that were around for Magento 1 are available for Magento 2, so that's not really an issue anymore. Magento 2 really is an extension of Magento 1 and contains all the best parts of N1, but not many of the drawbacks of it. It's really not all that much difficult from Magento 1 as long as you have the good training resources in place to learn it. It's worth noting I created a course called Magento 2 Coding Kickstart course, which really teaches you everything you need to know about Magento 2, including best practices and design patterns and so on. So definitely check that out. Magento is now supported by Adobe, which is really a world-class organization. So as far as a backing of a commercial company, it definitely has that going for itself. I've already seen their processes and procedures update and improve since the acquisition happened, and it really seems they're dedicated to open source and continuing to expand on the legacy that Magento 1 started. There are some other options though. If you are a small merchant and don't need everything that Magento 2 was created to offer, there is Shopify and BigCommerce and other SaaS solutions available. These will be pretty appealing to smaller merchants because they're easier to use and configure, and they're definitely more affordable. But they will be unappealing if you are coming from a heavily customized storefront and need a solution in place that is not offered on their platform. And of course, with any SaaS offering, it's always important to remember that you don't own all of your code. This can provide some benefits as you don't have to maintain that core code, but it doesn't offer the complete flexibility you have from really owning 100% of your code. Your platform is now also placed in the hands of that vendor. So if you don't completely trust that company, the decisions that they make will affect your business. There are also some headless options that you can choose from, such as Vue Storefront or PWA Studio, which is still in pretty heavy development. I'm personally not against any of these solutions, but just keep in mind that they're built on an entirely different dev stack, which is JavaScript. So you may need a completely dedicated team that's really experienced with JavaScript to handle your project. This will also most likely require a completely different development process and procedures in place. And you're not nearly as stable as a platform like Magento 2 that's been in place for already almost 5 years now. Just make sure whatever option you pick that you're extremely comfortable with your decision, because a bad decision can really adversely affect your entire storefront. I hope you found this video very useful. Remember to like and subscribe to my channel for more content about Magento. And my friends, keep coding.